The iron gates of Castle Dragomir slammed shut with a sound like death itself, and every servant inside felt their blood turn to ice when the Vampire King's voice echoed through the ancient halls. "No one leaves until I find her." Katerina Knox had been working as a conservator at the city's historical archives for 3 years before she discovered that vampires were real. It happened on a Tuesday evening when she stayed late to catalog a collection of medieval manuscripts that had been donated by an anonymous benefactor. The documents were beautiful, illuminated with gold leaf and written in languages she'd spent her entire academic career studying. She'd been so absorbed in photographing a particularly ornate page that she hadn't heard anyone enter the basement archive until a voice like dark velvet spoke directly behind her. "Those belong to my mother." She'd spun around so fast she knocked over her camera tripod and found herself staring at the most extraordinarily beautiful man she'd ever seen. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with snow-white hair that fell past his shoulders and skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim archive lighting. His eyes were the color of fresh blood, and when he smiled at her startled expression, she saw fangs. "I'm sorry," she'd stammered, backing against the table. "The archives are closed. You can't be down here." "I go where I please," he had said, moving closer with a grace that was utterly inhuman. "I am Vladislav Dragomir, and these documents were taken from my family's estate 300 years ago. I've come to reclaim them." That should have been the end of it. She should have screamed, run, called security. Instead, she'd looked into those crimson eyes and said, "These manuscripts belong to the city now. They were legally acquired, and they're part of our permanent collection. If you want to dispute ownership, you'll need to file the proper paperwork." He'd stared at her for a long moment, and then he'd done something she would later learn was extraordinarily rare. He'd laughed. It was a rich, genuine sound that transformed his severe features into something almost warm. "What is your name, little archivist?" "Katerina Knox, and I'm not little. I'm 5'7". "I'm 432 years old, Katerina Knox. Everyone is little to me." He'd circled her slowly, examining her the way she'd been examining his manuscripts. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," she'd admitted, "but these documents are my responsibility, and I take my job seriously." That had been 6 months ago. 6 months of late-night visits where Vladislav would appear in the archives, and they would discuss history, art, and the world he'd lived through. 6 months of her slowly falling for a creature who shouldn't exist, who was dangerous and powerful and treated her like she was something precious. 6 months of him courting her with an old-world formality that made her heart race, bringing her rare books and taking her to restaurants that only opened after midnight, where she was the only human among creatures that drank blood instead of wine. She'd never been to his castle, though. He'd always kept that part of his life separate, even as their relationship deepened into something that felt inevitable and terrifying and absolutely right. He was the Vampire King, ruler of all vampires in the Northern Territories, and there were protocols, he'd explained, dangers. His world was full of political intrigue and ancient feuds, and he wanted to keep her safe from all of it. Until tonight, when she'd finally demanded to see where he lived, to be part of his whole life instead of just the fragments he showed her. They'd argued about it in her apartment, his eyes blazing red with frustration and something that looked like fear. "You don't understand what you're asking," he'd said, his accent thickening the way it did when he was emotional. "My castle is not safe for humans. There are vampires there who would see you as nothing more than prey." "Then protect me," she'd shot back. "You're their king, aren't you? Or is all this just a game to you? Am I just some human novelty you'll get bored with?" The words had been cruel and unfair, and she'd regretted them the moment they left her mouth. The hurt that flashed across his face was so raw it made her chest ache. "You think I would risk my heart on a game?" His voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. "I have lived for centuries without feeling anything close to what I feel for you. You are not a novelty, Katerina. You are everything." She'd softened then, moving closer to cup his cold face in her warm hands. "Then let me in. All the way in. I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think are safe enough to show me." He'd closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starving for affection. "If I take you to Castle Dragomir, you will see things that will frighten you. My court is not gentle. The other vampires will test you, challenge you. They will try to break you to prove that you're not worthy of standing beside their king. Let them try, she'd said with more confidence than she felt. I'm tougher than I look. He'd opened his eyes then, studying her with an intensity that made her feel naked. Finally, he'd nodded. Friday night. I will send a car for you at sunset. Bring clothes for a weekend stay, and Katerina. He'd pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. Stay close to me at all times. Trust no one else. Promise me. I promise. That had been 3 days ago. She'd spent the time since then oscillating between excitement and terror, packing and repacking her bag, researching vampire lore, even though she knew most of it was wrong. Vladislav had been patient with her endless questions over the phone, explaining the reality behind the myths. Yes, sunlight would kill him. No, he didn't need an invitation to enter homes that was propaganda spread by humans who wanted to feel safe. Yes, he needed blood to survive, but he had willing donors among his staff and never killed unless it was necessary for survival or justice. When Friday arrived, she was ready. As ready as anyone could be to enter a vampire's castle. The car that picked her up was a sleek black vehicle with tinted windows so dark she couldn't see inside. The driver was human, a quiet man who introduced himself as Thomas and took her bag with professional courtesy. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding up into the mountains where the city lights faded behind them and the forest grew thick and wild on either side of the narrow road. Castle Dragomir appeared suddenly as they rounded a curve, illuminated by floodlights that made its gray stone walls glow against the dark sky. It was massive, a Gothic masterpiece of spires and battlements that looked like something out of a fairy tale, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Vladislav was waiting at the main entrance, dressed in black as always, his white hair pulled back from his face. When she stepped out of the car, his expression transformed from regal formality to genuine warmth, and he moved to meet her with inhuman speed, pulling her into his arms. You came, he murmured against her hair. Did you think I wouldn't? I feared you would reconsider once you had time to think clearly. He pulled back to look at her, his red eyes searching her face. It's not too late to turn back. She stood on her toes to kiss him, her warm lips meeting his cool ones, and felt him shudder against her. I'm not going anywhere. Stop trying to scare me away. He smiled then, that rare, genuine smile that made him look younger than his centuries. Then welcome to Castle Dragomir, my darling. Try not to let anyone eat you. That's not funny. I wasn't joking. He kept her hand firmly in his as he led her inside, and immediately she understood why he'd been so hesitant. The castle's interior was breathtaking, all soaring ceilings and ancient tapestries and candelabras that cast dancing shadows across marble floors. But it was also filled with vampires. They lined the entrance hall, dozens of them, all with that same pale skin and otherworldly beauty, all watching her with eyes that ranged from curious to hostile to hungry. My court, Vladislav said quietly. They've gathered to meet the human who has captured their king's attention. An older vampire stepped forward, a woman with white hair coiled in an elaborate style and a gown that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her eyes were ice blue, cold and assessing. This is Lady Seraphine, Vladislav introduced, my chief advisor and oldest friend. Your Majesty, Seraphine said, her voice carrying the barest hint of disapproval. You honor us with your presence. Her gaze shifted to Katerina. And you've brought a pet. Katerina felt Vladislav tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. I'm not a pet, I'm a guest, and you are. Seraphine's eyebrows rose slightly. Bold, that will either serve you well here or get you killed. She turned back to Vladislav. We need to discuss the matter of the Western territories. There have been incidents. Tomorrow, Vladislav said firmly. Tonight, I am introducing Katerina to her new surroundings. As you wish, Your Majesty. Seraphine inclined her head, but Katerina caught the flash of concern in her eyes. Though I would counsel against delay. The situation is becoming urgent. The rest of that first evening passed in a blur of introductions and barely veiled threats. Vladislav never left her side, his hand either holding hers or resting possessively at the small of her back. She met dozens of vampires whose names she immediately forgot, ancient creatures who looked at her like she was a puzzle or a meal or both. A few were genuinely welcoming, particularly a younger vampire named Lucian who had kind eyes and actually shook her hand instead of just staring. Don't mind the others, Lucian said quietly when Vladislav was momentarily distracted by another advisor. "They're not used to humans being anything other than food or servants. You're the first one the king has ever brought here as an equal." "I'm not sure everyone sees me as an equal," Katerina replied, watching a group of female vampires who were glaring at her with undisguised hostility. "They're jealous," Lucian said with a grin. "Half the court has been trying to seduce Vladislav for decades. You accomplished in 6 months what they couldn't manage in a century." By the time Vladislav finally led her away from the gathering, Katerina's head was spinning and her nerves were frayed. He took her up a grand staircase to the private wing of the castle, through corridors lined with paintings of stern-faced vampires who were probably his ancestors. His chambers were at the very top of the North Tower, a sprawling suite of rooms that managed to be both luxurious and comfortable. "You'll stay here," he said, setting her bag down in what appeared to be a bedroom the size of her entire apartment. "With me, if you're comfortable with that, or I can have a separate room prepared if you prefer." She turned to face him, taking in the uncertainty in his expression. This powerful, ancient vampire king was nervous about whether she wanted to share his room. It was endearing in a way that made her heart clench. "I want to stay with you," she said simply. The relief on his face was palpable. He crossed to her in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something infinitely precious. "I know tonight was overwhelming. My court can be difficult. That's one word for it." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of old books and something spicy she'd never been able to identify. "That woman, Seraphine, she doesn't approve of me." "Seraphine doesn't approve of anything that disrupts tradition," Vladislav said, stroking her hair. "She's served my family for 300 years, and she's seen countless rulers make mistakes in the name of passion. She fears I'm doing the same." "And are you?" He pulled back to look at her, his red eyes intense. "The only mistake I could make would be letting you go. You are not a weakness, Katerina. You make me stronger. You make me want to be better than the monster I've been for centuries." She kissed him then, deeply, pouring all her feelings into it. He responded with carefully controlled passion, always mindful of his strength, his fangs. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I should let you rest," he said, though he made no move to release her. "Dawn is still hours away, but you're exhausted." She was, but she also didn't want this moment to end. "Will you stay with me?" "Always." She fell asleep that night in a vampire's arms, in a castle full of creatures that could kill her without effort, and felt safer than she ever had in her life. She woke to find him gone, and sunlight streaming through gaps in the heavy curtains. There was a note on the pillow beside her in elegant handwriting. "Had to attend to urgent business. Lucian will escort you to breakfast. Stay in the castle, please. V." The "please" was underlined twice, which made her smile even as she felt a flutter of unease. What kind of urgent business couldn't wait until she was awake? She showered and dressed in jeans and a sweater, feeling underdressed for a castle but determined to be comfortable. Lucian appeared at her door exactly when she finished, offering her a friendly smile. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Or afternoon, technically. You humans and your daylight schedules. Come on, the kitchen staff has prepared something for you." As they walked through the castle's corridors, Katerina couldn't help but marvel at how different everything looked in daylight. The Gothic atmosphere was still there, but it was tempered by the sun streaming through tall windows, illuminating the architectural details she'd missed in the candlelight the night before. "Where's Vladislav?" she asked as Lucian led her down a different staircase than they'd used the night before. "Meeting with Seraphine and the territorial commanders," Lucian said, his expression growing serious. "There's been trouble in the western regions. Vampire hunters have been getting bolder, and there have been some deaths on both sides. The king needs to decide how to respond." Katerina's stomach tightened. "Vampire hunters? Those are real?" "Unfortunately, yes. Most are just humans who've read too many myths and think they're saving the world. But some are organized, trained, and dangerous. They've been quiet for the past few decades, but something stirred them up recently." He glanced at her. "Vladislav didn't tell you?" "He doesn't like to worry me with the dangerous parts of his world." "That's because he's terrified of losing you," Lucian said bluntly. "I've known him for over 100 years, and I've never seen him like this. You've gotten under his skin in a way I didn't think was possible for someone his age." They reached a sunny breakfast room where a table had been set with human food: eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee. Katerina's stomach growled embarrassingly loud. "Eat," Lucian encouraged, settling into a chair across from her. I'll keep you company, even though watching humans eat is deeply weird. She laughed despite her nerves and dug into the food, which was delicious. So you're really okay with me being here? You don't think I'm just some human who's going to get Vladislav killed? I think you're good for him, Lucian said thoughtfully. He's been alone for a very long time. Oh, he's had companions, relationships, but nothing that touched him the way you clearly do. He smiles more now. He seems more alive, ironically enough. They talked for over an hour, Lucian regaling her with stories about vampire society and Vladislav's long history. She learned that Vladislav had become king at 25, turned into a vampire during a brutal war that had devastated his kingdom. He'd spent the first century of his immortal life consolidating power and bringing peace to the vampire territories, earning respect through a combination of strength and surprisingly progressive policies. He was considered a fair but firm ruler, someone who valued honor and justice over tradition for tradition's sake. That's why Seraphine worries, Lucian explained. She thinks his feelings for you might cloud his judgment, make him vulnerable to political enemies who would use you against him. Are there enemies like that? There are always enemies when you're a king, Lucian said grimly. But most of them know better than to move against Vladislav directly. He's too powerful, too well-connected. They'd have to be very clever or very desperate. Katerina was about to ask more when a commotion erupted from somewhere deeper in the castle. Raised voices, running footsteps, and then a sound that made her blood freeze. Vladislav's voice, raw with fury and fear, shouting orders. Lucian was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he commanded, and then he was gone, moving with that impossible vampire speed. But Katerina had never been good at following orders when something was wrong. She followed the sounds of chaos, running through corridors until she reached what appeared to be the castle's main hall. It was filled with vampires, all talking at once, and in the center stood Vladislav, looking more terrifying than she'd ever seen him. His eyes were blazing crimson, his fangs fully extended, and the air around him seemed to crackle with barely contained violence. "What happened?" she called out, pushing through the crowd toward him. His head whipped toward her, and for a second she saw such relief on his face that it hurt. Then his expression hardened into something cold and terrible. "Katerina, thank God." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders almost painfully. "You're safe. You're actually safe." "Of course I'm safe. I was just having breakfast. What's going on?" "Someone breached the castle," Seraphine said, appearing at Vladislav's side. "They disabled our security systems and got into the private wings. We have a traitor among us." "Not just a traitor," Vladislav said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "An assassin. We found 3 dead vampires in the East Wing, all killed with wooden stakes while they slept. And we found this." He held up a photograph, and Katerina's heart stopped. It was a picture of her, taken sometime in the past few days. In the photo, she was leaving her apartment building, unaware she was being watched. Someone had drawn a red X over her face. "They were after you," Vladislav said, his eyes meeting hers. "They came here to kill you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "But why? I'm nobody. I'm just an archivist." "You're the Vampire King's lover," Seraphine said bluntly. "That makes you a target. That makes you a weapon that can be used against him." Vladislav's hands were trembling where they gripped her shoulders. "I should never have brought you here. I should have kept you far away from all this." "It's too late for regrets," Seraphine said sharply. "The question now is what we do next. The assassin could still be in the castle. They could be one of our own people." "Then we lock it down," Vladislav said, and his voice had gone cold and deadly. "Every entrance, every exit. No one leaves until we find the traitor. Anyone who tries to flee is automatically suspect." "Your Majesty, that's extreme," another vampire protested. "You're talking about imprisoning your entire court." "I'm talking about protecting what's mine," Vladislav snarled, and the raw possession in his voice made Katerina shiver. "Someone in this castle tried to take her from me. Someone I trusted, fed, protected, and I will tear this entire structure down, stone by stone, until I find them." He turned to bark orders at his guards, his whole demeanor transformed into something primal and dangerous. This was not the cultured, gentle vampire who brought her rare books and discussed poetry. This was a predator, an ancient king whose power was absolute and terrifying, Seal the gates, he commanded. Post guards at every entrance. I want every member of this household accounted for and confined to their quarters. Anyone who resists is to be restrained. I want a full inventory of weapons, a sweep of every room, and I want the bodies in the East Wing examined for any clues about the killer's identity. Vampires scattered to obey, moving with urgent speed. Vladislav turned back to Katerina, and she saw the fear beneath his fury. I need to get you somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere I can protect you while we hunt this bastard down. I'm not hiding, Katerina said, finding her voice despite her terror. If someone is targeting me, I want to help catch them. Absolutely not. You're human, Katerina. Fragile, mortal. If they get their hands on you. His voice broke, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I can't lose you. Do you understand? In 4 centuries, I have never felt fear like this. I would burn the world down before I let anyone harm you. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his body. Then don't push me away. Let me stay by your side. You said I'd be safest with you, remember? He pulled back to look at her, and gradually, the crimson in his eyes faded to a less violent red. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm not thinking clearly. He took her hand. Come. We'll coordinate the search from my study. You don't leave my sight until this is resolved. The next several hours were tense and chaotic. Vladislav's study became a command center with vampires constantly coming and going with reports. The entire castle had been locked down, with over 200 vampires confined to their quarters under guard. The 3 murdered vampires had been members of the household staff, killed in their daylight sleep when they were most vulnerable. The method was professional, efficient, designed to send a message. This wasn't just an assassin after your lady, Seraphine said grimly, studying a map of the castle laid out on Vladislav's desk. This was a demonstration, someone showing us that they can strike at the heart of your power whenever they choose. The hunters, Lucian suggested. It has to be. Who else would be bold enough? The hunters don't have the access, Vladislav said, pacing like a caged predator. Someone inside helped them, someone who knows our security, our routines, our weaknesses. Katerina sat in a chair by the window, trying to stay out of the way while her mind raced. Something about all this didn't make sense. If vampire hunters wanted her dead, why not attack her at her apartment? Why risk infiltrating a castle full of vampires just to leave a threatening photograph? Maybe it wasn't hunters, she said slowly, and all eyes turned to her. I mean, think about it. If you wanted to kill me, there are easier ways than breaking into Castle Dragomir. But if you wanted to destabilize Vladislav's rule, to make him look weak or distracted, to turn his court against him, this would be a pretty effective way to do it. Silence fell over the room as the vampires processed her words. Seraphine's expression shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. She makes a valid point, the older vampire said. You've made enemies with your progressive policies, Your Majesty. There are those who believe the old ways are being eroded, that you've grown soft. A human lover would be proof of that in their eyes. The traditionalists, Lucian breathed. But who? Most of them are all talk. Vladislav had stopped pacing, his expression dangerous. Start with everyone who opposed my ruling on the blood laws last year. Cross-reference that with anyone who has the skills and access to breach our security. And find out who had duty assignments that would have put them near the East Wing during the daylight hours. More vampires hurried off to follow his orders. Seraphine lingered, her cold eyes studying Katerina with new interest. You're clever, she said, perhaps more suitable for a king than I initially believed. I don't want to be suitable, Katerina said tiredly. I just want whoever is doing this caught so everyone can be safe. An admirable sentiment, Seraphine said, but naive. Safety is an illusion in our world. There will always be another threat, another enemy. If you intend to stay with Vladislav, you need to accept that your life will never be simple again. I already accepted that the night I fell in love with a vampire. Something shifted in Seraphine's expression, a softening that made her look less ancient and more simply sad. He's lucky to have found you. Try not to get killed before you have a chance to see if this love can truly last. She swept from the room, leaving Katerina alone with Vladislav. He came to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Are you all right? He asked gently. This must be terrifying for you. I'm holding it together, she said, reaching up to touch his cold face. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When you find whoever did this, don't let rage make you do something you'll regret. I know you're furious. I know you want blood, but you're better than that. You're a good king, a good man. Don't let this change that." His eyes closed, and he leaned into her touch. "You ask me to show mercy to someone who threatened you, who killed my people, who violated my home. I'm asking you to remember who you are," she said firmly. "Justice, not vengeance. That's what you told me you believe in." "You make me want to be worthy of that belief," he murmured, "even when every instinct I have is screaming for violence." They stayed like that for a long moment, finding peace in each other's presence despite the chaos surrounding them. Then a guard burst into the room, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty, we found something. Someone tried to flee through the old catacombs beneath the castle. We've cornered them in the lower chambers." Vladislav was on his feet instantly, his demeanor shifting back to that of a warrior king. "Take me there, now." He looked at Katerina. "You stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Be careful," she said, fear making her voice shake. He crossed back to her, kissed her fiercely, desperately, and then he was gone. The waiting was agony. Katerina paced the study, jumping at every sound, imagining terrible scenarios. What if the cornered assassin wasn't alone? What if there was more than one traitor? What if Vladislav was walking into a trap? An hour passed. Then two. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky outside in shades of orange and red that looked too much like blood. Katerina was standing at the window, trying to calm her racing heart when she heard the door handle turn. She spun around, hope and fear warring in her chest. "Vladislav?" But it wasn't Vladislav who entered. It was a vampire she didn't recognize, a tall man with white hair pulled back in a severe style and eyes that were flat and cold. "I'm afraid the king is occupied," the vampire said, closing the door behind him. "But I thought you and I should have a conversation, Miss Knox." Every instinct screamed danger. Katerina backed away, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. "Who are you?" "My name is Casimir. I'm one of the territorial commanders." He moved further into the room with predatory grace. "And I'm the one who's been trying to save this kingdom from your corrupting influence." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You're the traitor." "Traitor?" Casimir laughed, a cold sound. "I'm a loyalist. I've served the vampire people for 6 centuries. I've watched king after king make the same mistakes, letting sentiment weaken them, letting humans distract them from their duties. When I heard that Vladislav had become infatuated with a mortal, I knew I had to act. You killed those vampires, your own people." "Necessary sacrifices," Casimir said dismissively. "They would have understood. Everything I've done has been to protect our way of life, to remind Vladislav of what he truly is, a vampire, a predator, not some lovesick fool mooning over a human who will be dead in the blink of an eye." "So what now?" Katerina demanded, proud that her voice barely shook. "You're going to kill me? That'll really endear you to your king." "I'm going to give you a choice," Casimir said. "You can leave, tonight. I'll provide you safe passage out of the castle, help you disappear where Vladislav will never find you. He'll grieve, certainly, but he'll recover. In a century or two, you'll be nothing but a bittersweet memory. He'll rule properly again, without the distraction of protecting a fragile human." "And if I refuse?" Casimir's expression hardened. "Then I'll kill you, and I'll make sure everyone believes it was the hunters. I'll use your death to start a war that will unite our people and give Vladislav a purpose beyond his infatuation. Either way, you're gone. The only question is whether you get to live." Katerina's mind raced. She needed to stall, needed to keep him talking until Vladislav returned. "That's your plan? Force me to choose between abandoning the man I love or dying? That's not justice. That's just cowardice dressed up as loyalty." Anger flashed across Casimir's face. "You dare call me a coward? What else would you call someone who murders sleeping vampires and threatens an unarmed human?" She forced herself to meet his eyes, to show no fear even though she was terrified. "You're not trying to save your king. You're trying to control him. You can't stand that he chose someone you didn't approve of, that he's found happiness you don't understand." "Happiness?" Casimir spat. "Happiness is a distraction, a weakness. Vladislav is meant for greatness, not domesticity with a mortal who will wither and die before he's even begun to tire of her." "Then you don't know him at all," Katerina said. "Because the Vladislav I love would never sacrifice someone innocent for political convenience. He would never choose power over the people he cares about, and if you think killing me will make him the king you want, you're delusional. It'll destroy him. Then perhaps it's time for a new king. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Casimir moved toward her with inhuman speed, and Katerina did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from Vladislav's desk and threw it at the vampire's head. It shattered against his temple, not doing any real damage but surprising him enough that he staggered. Katerina bolted for the door, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. She made it 3 steps before Casimir caught her, his hand closing around her throat and lifting her off her feet. She clawed at his arm, gasping for air, spots dancing in her vision. "Pity," Casimir said coldly. "You could have lived." The door exploded inward, torn off its hinges with a sound like thunder. Vladislav stood in the doorway, and the sight of him was terrifying. His eyes were blazing pure crimson, his fangs fully extended, and the rage rolling off him was palpable. Behind him, Katerina could see Lucian, Seraphine, and at least a dozen other vampires, all armed and ready for violence. "Release her," Vladislav said, and his voice was barely human. "Now." "Or what?" Casimir tightened his grip on Katerina's throat, making her choke. "You'll kill me? I'm one of your most trusted commanders. You need me." "I need nothing more than I need her alive," Vladislav said, and he moved. Katerina had seen him move fast before, but this was different. This was the full speed and power of an ancient vampire king unleashed in fury. One moment he was in the doorway, the next he had crossed the room and his hand was around Casimir's wrist, crushing it with such force that the other vampire screamed and dropped Katerina. She collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing, and immediately felt hands pulling her away from the fight. Lucian was there, his face grim, dragging her to safety as Vladislav and Casimir crashed into each other with violence that shook the room. "Don't watch," Lucian said, but Katerina couldn't look away. The fight was brutal and swift. Casimir was clearly skilled, 6 centuries old and trained in combat, but he was no match for Vladislav's rage-fueled strength. Within seconds, Vladislav had him pinned against the wall, one hand around his throat, the other poised to strike. "You touched her," Vladislav snarled. "You dared to put your hands on what is mine." "Kill me then," Casimir gasped. "Prove that you're everything I said you were, a slave to your emotions, weak, unworthy." Vladislav's hand trembled, and for a moment, Katerina was sure he would tear Casimir's head from his shoulders. Then his eyes found hers across the room, and she saw him fighting for control. "Justice," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "Not vengeance." Something in Vladislav's expression shifted. The crimson faded slightly from his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold but controlled. "You wanted to remind me what I am, Casimir. Let me show you. I am not a mindless predator. I am a king. And kings don't grant their traitors the mercy of a quick death." He released Casimir's throat but maintained his grip, preventing escape. "You murdered 3 of my people. You threatened my court. You attempted to kill the woman I love. For those crimes, you will face justice, public justice. Every vampire in the Northern Territories will know what happens to those who betray their king." He turned to his guards. "Take him to the cells. Silver chains, post guards. He's to have no visitors, no blood, nothing. He'll stand trial within the week." As the guards moved to obey, dragging a struggling Casimir from the room, Vladislav crossed to Katerina in 3 long strides. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as they moved over her, checking for injuries. "Did he hurt you? Are you all right?" "God, Katerina, when I came back and found you gone from where I told you to stay, when I realized he'd gotten to you." His voice broke, and she realized with shock that there were tears on his face. Blood tears, crimson against his pale skin. "I'm okay," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm okay. You got here in time." He buried his face against her shoulder, his whole body shaking. "I could have lost you. I was so close to losing you." "But you didn't." She held him tighter, this powerful vampire king who had fallen apart at the thought of her death. "I'm right here. I'm safe." Around them, the other vampires quietly filed out, giving them privacy. Only Seraphine lingered in the doorway for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once, as if acknowledging something, and left them alone. They stayed on the floor of Vladislav's destroyed study for a long time, holding each other, both trying to process how close they'd come to tragedy. Finally, Vladislav pulled back enough to look at her, his red eyes still wet with blood tears. I can't do this, he said hoarsely. I can't keep putting you in danger like this. Casimir was right about one thing. My enemies will always try to use you against me. As long as you're with me, your life will be at risk. Stop, Katerina said firmly. Don't you dare use this as an excuse to push me away. I chose to be here. I chose you knowing the risks, and I'll choose you every single day if you let me. You could die. I could die crossing the street tomorrow. I could die in a car accident or from some random disease. Life is dangerous, Vladislav. Love is dangerous. But it's also worth it. She cupped his face in her hands, making sure he was looking at her. You told me once that I make you want to be better. Well, you do the same for me. You make me braver, stronger. You make me want to fight for what we have. So don't give up on us now. I'm terrified, he admitted. I've faced armies, survived wars, ruled for centuries, but nothing has ever scared me the way the thought of losing you does. Then we'll be terrified together, she said, but we'll also be together. That's what matters. He kissed her then, deeply and desperately, and she tasted the salt of his blood tears on his lips. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I've loved you from the moment you stood in that archive and told me I needed to file paperwork to reclaim my family's manuscripts. You were so fierce, so brave, so completely unimpressed by what I was. And every day since then, I've fallen deeper. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 4 centuries, Katerina Knox. And I swear to you, I will spend every day I have left making sure you never regret choosing a monster to love. You're not a monster, she said softly. You're just mine. In the days that followed, the castle slowly returned to normal. The lockdown was lifted once they were certain there were no other traitors, though security measures were substantially increased. Casimir's trial was held in the Grand Hall, with representatives from all the vampire territories present to witness justice being done. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 50 years of imprisonment in the deepest cells beneath the castle, followed by permanent exile from the northern territories. It was a harsh sentence, but not as brutal as many vampires had called for. Some thought Vladislav was being too merciful. Others recognized it for what it was, a demonstration that their king could control his rage, that he could choose justice over vengeance, even when the crime was personal. Katerina attended the trial, sitting at Vladislav's side in front of the entire vampire court. It was her first public appearance as the king's acknowledged partner, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. By placing her beside him, Vladislav was declaring to all his people that she was under his protection, that she was important, that she wasn't going anywhere. Not everyone was happy about it, but no one dared voice their objections after what had happened to Casimir. As winter turned to spring, Katerina found herself settling into life at Castle Dragomir. She kept her job at the archives, commuting back to the city a few days a week, but the castle became her home in a way her apartment never had. She got to know the vampires of Vladislav's court, earning respect through a combination of kindness and refusal to be intimidated. Some remained cold to her, but others became genuine friends. Lucian appointed himself her unofficial bodyguard and guide, teaching her the ins and outs of vampire politics. Seraphine, surprisingly, became something like a mentor, recognizing in Katerina a sharp mind and willingness to learn. The older vampire began including her in council meetings, asking her opinion on matters of state, treating her like the future queen many were beginning to expect her to become. That was the question that hung unspoken between Katerina and Vladislav. What future could they really have together? She was mortal, human, aging every day while he remained eternally frozen at 25. They didn't talk about it, both of them content to exist in the present, but it was always there in the background. Until one night in late spring when Vladislav took her to the castle's highest tower, to a balcony that overlooked the forest and mountains stretching to the horizon. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. I brought you here because I need to ask you something, Vladislav said, his hands clasped behind his back in that formal way he had when he was nervous. Something important. Katerina's heart began to race. Okay. We've been dancing around the obvious problem, he continued. The fact that you're human and I'm not. The fact that you'll age and I won't. The fact that if things continue as they are, I'll have perhaps 60 more years with you if we're extraordinarily lucky. And then you'll be gone. and I'll have centuries of existence ahead of me without you." She'd known this conversation was coming, but hearing him say it out loud still hurt. "I know. I've thought about it too." "There is an alternative," he said, turning to face her. "I could turn you, make you like me, vampire, immortal. We would have forever instead of decades." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and weight. It was the question she'd been avoiding thinking about because the answer was so complicated. "Is that what you want?" she asked carefully. "I want you to have a choice," he said. "I want you to have all the information, all the time you need to decide. I won't pressure you, won't try to convince you either way, but I needed you to know that the option exists, if you want it." Katerina moved to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the moonlit landscape. "What would it mean, really? I know the basics of vampire lore, but what would I be giving up? What would I gain?" He came to stand beside her, his voice quiet but honest. "You would gain immortality, strength, speed, senses beyond human comprehension. You would never age, never get sick, never die unless someone kills you. You would have centuries to learn, to explore, to become more than you ever could as a human. And I would lose? Sunlight," he said. "The ability to have children, the ability to eat regular food, though you could still taste it if you wanted. You would need blood to survive. You would have to watch any human friends or family you have age and die while you remain unchanged. You would become something most humans fear and hate." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Would I still be me?" "Yes," he said firmly. "The transformation doesn't change who you are at your core. It enhances certain traits, gives you new instincts and urges you'd need to learn to control, but you would still be Katerina. Still the brave, intelligent, fierce woman I fell in love with." "I need time," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make in a moment. It's my entire life, my entire future." "I know." He took her hand, lifting it to his lips. "Take all the time you need, a month, a year, a decade. I'll still be here, still loving you, whatever you decide." She turned to face him fully, studying his beautiful, ageless face in the moonlight. "And if I choose to stay human? If I decide I want the life I was born to have, even if it means less time with you?" Pain flashed across his face, but he answered honestly. "Then I'll love you for every moment I have you. I'll make sure those decades are so full of joy and love that they feel like forever. And when you're gone, I'll carry you with me for the rest of my existence. You've changed me, Katerina. You've made me remember what it means to feel, to hope, to love. That doesn't go away just because you do." Tears spilled down her cheeks at the raw emotion in his voice. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I know the feeling," he said, wiping her tears away with gentle fingers. "It's worth it, though. The terror, the risk, the inevitable pain. You're worth all of it." They stayed on that balcony until nearly dawn, talking about the future in a way they never had before. Vladislav told her about the process of transformation, the 3 days of agony as vampire venom rewrote human biology, the first few months of adjustment as new instincts kicked in. He told her about the eternity stretching ahead, about the things she could learn and see and do with centuries at her disposal. But he also talked about the darker side, the loneliness of immortality, the weight of watching the world change while you stayed the same, the difficulty of forming connections when you knew you'd likely outlive everyone around you, the constant awareness of being a predator, of needing blood to survive, of being fundamentally different from the humanity you'd left behind. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Katerina felt like she understood both the gift and the curse of vampirism in a way she never had before. It wasn't a simple choice between mortality and immortality. It was a choice between two completely different existences, each with its own joys and sorrows. "I need to think," she said as Vladislav reluctantly prepared to retreat from the coming sun. "But thank you for being honest with me, for not trying to make it sound better or worse than it is. You deserve honesty," he said, "in this and in everything." Over the following weeks, Katerina wrestled with her decision. She made lists of pros and cons, talked to Lucian and Seraphine about their experiences as vampires, even reached out to a few of the other turned vampires in the court to hear their stories. Some of them loved their immortal lives without reservation. Others were more ambivalent, admitting that they sometimes missed the simplicity and urgency of being human. She also spent time thinking about her human life. Her parents had died years ago, and she had no siblings. Her few close friends from college had drifted away as adult life took them in different directions. Her job at the archives was fulfilling, but not a lifelong calling. There wasn't much tying her to humanity beyond the life itself, the familiar comfort of being what she'd always been. And then there was Vladislav. The thought of having centuries with him instead of mere decades was intoxicating. The thought of growing old while he stayed young, of eventually having to say goodbye, of leaving him alone after giving him hope for companionship that was unbearable. But was that a good enough reason to give up her humanity? Was love enough to justify such a fundamental transformation? She was still wrestling with these questions when summer arrived in full force, bringing with it an unexpected visitor to Castle Dragomir. A messenger arrived one evening with news that a delegation from the southern vampire territories was requesting an audience with the king. It was unusual, but not unprecedented. Vladislav had diplomatic relationships with most of the major vampire rulers. What was unusual was that the southern king himself had come, a powerful vampire named Dragan, who was even older than Vladislav and notoriously reclusive. "This must be important," Seraphine said as they prepared the grand hall for the formal reception. "Dragan hasn't left his territory in over a century." "Do you know him?" Katerina asked, helping arrange seating, even though multiple vampires had told her she didn't need to. "I've met him twice," Seraphine said. "He's old-fashioned, traditional, very concerned with vampire purity and maintaining our separation from humanity. If he's heard about you, this visit could be problematic." That was an understatement. When Dragan arrived that evening with his entourage of stern-faced vampires, his disdain for Katerina was immediately obvious. He looked at her the way someone might look at a piece of trash that had blown into their pristine home, with disgust and a desire to remove it as quickly as possible. "Vladislav," Dragan said, his voice cold and formal. "I see the rumors are true. You've brought a human into your household." "Katerina is my partner," Vladislav said, his tone brooking no argument. "She's a welcome guest in Castle Dragomir and will be treated with the respect that status deserves." "Respect?" Dragan laughed, a harsh sound. "For a mortal? Have you lost all sense of propriety, all understanding of what we are?" "I understand perfectly what I am," Vladislav replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm a king who makes his own choices about who he keeps close. If you've come here to lecture me about tradition, you've wasted a journey." "I've come to discuss the hunter situation," Dragan said. "The attacks are spreading to the southern territories now. We've lost 30 vampires in the last 6 months to organized hunter cells. Something needs to be done." The conversation moved to the formal reception, where the vampire leaders discussed strategy and shared intelligence about the hunter threat. Katerina stayed quiet, sitting beside Vladislav and trying to ignore the hostile looks from Dragan's vampires. It became clear that the hunters had become far more organized and dangerous than anyone had realized, with funding and training that suggested government or military backing. "We need a unified response," Dragan argued, "all vampire territories working together to eliminate the threat." "I agree that cooperation is necessary," Vladislav said, "but we also need to understand why the hunters have become so bold. What changed? What drove them to escalate?" One of Dragan's advisors spoke up, his eyes fixed on Katerina. "Perhaps they've been emboldened by seeing our kind consorting openly with humans, treating them as equals rather than cattle." The implication was clear, and Katerina felt anger spark in her chest. Before she could respond, Vladislav was on his feet, his presence filling the room with threatening energy. "Choose your next words carefully," he said softly. "You're a guest in my house, but that protection only extends so far." "I'm simply stating facts," the advisor said, though he'd gone pale. "Vampires who associate too closely with humans, who blur the lines between predator and prey, undermine our security. They make humans think we're weak, vulnerable. Is it any wonder the hunters are becoming bolder when they see one of our kings keeping a human as a pet?" "She's not a pet," Vladislav snarled, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "She's the woman I love. And if that makes me weak in your eyes, perhaps you'd like to test that theory?" The room erupted into chaos, vampires on both sides rising to their feet, hands moving to weapons. Katerina's heart was pounding, terrified that she was about to witness a war start in this very hall. "Enough!" Dragan's voice cut through the noise like a blade. We're here to discuss the hunter threat, not to squabble like children. He turned his cold gaze to Vladislav. But you must admit, the situation is untenable. Your relationship with this human is causing problems throughout all vampire territories. Other humans are seeing it, thinking they can have relationships with our kind. They're losing their proper fear of us. If you truly care about vampire security, you'll end this distraction and focus on what matters. What matters, Vladislav said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, is that I don't take orders from you or anyone else about my personal life. What matters is that Katerina has more honor and courage in her mortal body than most immortals I've met. What matters is that I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel to make traditional vampires comfortable. He turned to address the entire assembly. I love a human. If that offends you, if it makes you question my strength or my fitness to rule, then challenge me. Face me directly. But don't you dare suggest that the hunter threat is somehow her fault or that vampire-human relationships are the problem. The problem is that we've lived in the shadows for so long that we've forgotten how to exist in a changing world. Katerina felt tears prickling her eyes at his passionate defense. She also felt the weight of every vampire gaze in the room, judging her, measuring her, finding her wanting. Dragan studied Vladislav for a long moment, then shook his head. You're making a mistake, one you'll regret when she's dead, and you're left with nothing but the political consequences of your sentimentality. That's my mistake to make, Vladislav said coldly. Now, shall we return to the actual purpose of this meeting, or would you like to insult my lady further? The rest of the evening was tense and unproductive, with both sides ultimately agreeing only to share intelligence about hunter movements and continue discussions at a later date. When Dragan's delegation finally left, well after midnight, Katerina felt exhausted down to her bones. I'm sorry, she said as Vladislav walked her back to their chambers. I'm causing problems for you, making your job harder. You're causing problems for vampires who are stuck in the past, Vladislav corrected. That's not the same thing. But maybe they have a point, she said quietly. Maybe I'm a distraction. Maybe you would be better off focusing on ruling without worrying about keeping me safe. He stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression of such fierce intensity that it made her breath catch. Listen to me, he said. You are not a distraction. You are not a weakness. You are the reason I still believe that immortality can be something more than endless political maneuvering and ancient grudges. You remind me why I wanted to be king in the first place, to make things better, to build something worth lasting forever. If I have to choose between being the king traditional vampires want and being the man you've helped me become, I choose you. Every time. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and fear into it. When they broke apart, she knew what her decision was. She'd known really since that night on the tower balcony. She'd just been too scared to admit it. Turn me, she said. I want to become a vampire. I want forever with you. He searched her face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Are you certain? This isn't something you can undo. I'm certain. I've thought about it from every angle, and I keep coming back to the same truth. I want to be with you. Really be with you, as an equal, as a partner who can stand beside you for centuries instead of just decades. I want to see where this world goes, what we can build together. I want forever. Joy and fear warred across his face. The transformation is painful. 3 days of agony while the venom changes you. I'll stay with you through every moment, but I won't be able to take the pain away. I know. I'm not afraid. That was a lie. She was terrified. But she was also certain. When can we do it? Are you sure you don't want more time? You don't need to rush this decision. I'm not rushing. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I know what I want, Vladislav. I want you. I want us. I want the life we can have together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was infinitely precious. Then we'll do it soon. I'll need to prepare things, make sure we have privacy and safety during your transformation. A week, maybe 2. But Katerina? Yes? Thank you. For choosing this, for choosing me. I promise I'll spend every day of eternity trying to be worthy of that choice. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Vladislav consulted with Seraphine and the few other vampires who had experience turning humans, making sure he understood the process completely. He cleared his schedule, postponing all non-essential meetings and delegating responsibilities so he could focus entirely on Katerina during her transformation. Katerina put her affairs in order, arranging for a leave of absence from the archives and writing letters to the few human friends she had, saying she was taking time to travel. She packed up her apartment, moving her most precious possessions to the castle. It felt strange and final, closing the door on her human life. The night they chose was a new moon, the castle dark and quiet. Vladislav had prepared a private chamber deep in the castle, away from prying eyes and potential disturbances. It was furnished comfortably, with a large bed and soft lighting, made to be as peaceful as possible for what was to come. "Last chance," Vladislav said as they stood at the threshold. "If you've changed your mind, there's no shame in it." "I haven't changed my mind," Katerina said firmly. "I'm ready." He led her inside, and they sat together on the edge of the bed. His hands were shaking slightly as he took hers, and she realized he was just as nervous as she was. "I love you," he said. "No matter what happens, remember that. When the pain comes, when you feel like you can't endure another moment, hold on to that. Hold on to us. I will. I love you too." He kissed her then, deeply and desperately, and she felt his fangs against her lips. Then he moved to her throat, his lips brushing her pulse point. "It'll be fast," he murmured. "Just a bite, and then the venom does the rest. Try to relax." She felt his fangs pierce her skin, a sharp pain that quickly faded to something almost pleasant. He drank carefully, controlled, and she felt her heartbeat start to slow. Then he pulled back and bit his own wrist, holding it to her lips. "Drink," he instructed, "as much as you can." His blood was strange and cold and metallic, but she forced herself to swallow, trusting him completely. After several mouthfuls, he pulled away and laid her back on the bed. "Now we wait," he said, settling beside her and taking her hand. "The venom is in your system. It'll start working soon." For the first hour, nothing happened. Katerina almost wondered if it had worked, if maybe she was one of those rare humans who was immune to vampire venom. Then the burning started. It began in her chest, right above her heart, a warmth that quickly escalated to heat and then to pain. The pain spread outward, racing through her veins like fire, consuming everything in its path. She gasped, gripping Vladislav's hand so hard she thought she might break bones. "I know," he said, his voice tight with shared agony. "I know it hurts. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." The pain grew worse, exponentially worse, until she was screaming, her body convulsing as the venom rewrote her biology from the inside out. Every cell felt like it was burning, dying, being reborn as something new. Time lost all meaning. There was only the pain in Vladislav's voice, constant and steady, anchoring her to sanity. "You're doing so well," he murmured. "So strong. Just hold on. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. It went on, hour after hour, day after day. She lost track of how long she'd been burning. Forever, maybe. An eternity of agony with no end in sight. She begged for it to stop, for death, for anything to make it end. Vladislav never left her side, his cool hands on her burning skin, his voice in her ear, talking her through every wave of pain. "One more hour," he'd say. "One more hour and it'll be done. You can do this. I believe in you." And somehow, impossibly, she endured. The pain that felt like it would kill her didn't. Her body survived the transformation, adapted, changed. And finally, after what Vladislav later told her was 3 days and 4 hours, the burning began to fade. It receded slowly, like a tide pulling back from a shore, leaving her gasping and weak but alive. No, not alive. Something different. She could feel it immediately, the changes in her body. Her senses were sharper, overwhelming in their intensity. She could hear Vladislav's breathing, the rustle of fabric, sounds from far away in the castle that should have been impossible to detect. She could smell everything, a million scents layering over each other in complex patterns. "Open your eyes," Vladislav said softly. "Let me see you." She did, and the world exploded into color and detail she'd never imagined. She could see individual dust motes in the air, the texture of the stone walls, the exact shade of crimson in Vladislav's eyes. And she could see him, really see him, in a way her human eyes never could. He was beautiful beyond description, and he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. "How do you feel?" he asked. She considered the question. Her body felt different, foreign, but also right, stronger, more. Strange, good. Is it supposed to feel this intense? Everything is heightened at first, he said. Your senses, your emotions, your physical capabilities. It'll settle over the next few weeks as you adjust. He helped her sit up carefully. How's the thirst? As soon as he mentioned it, she became aware of a burning in her throat, different from the transformation pain, but just as demanding. She was so thirsty, desperately thirsty, craving something she'd never needed before. She couldn't finish the sentence, but he understood. I know, I have blood for you. Human blood from our stores, ethically sourced from willing donors. He produced a crystal glass filled with dark red liquid. Drink slowly. Your body is still adjusting. She took the glass with trembling hands and sipped. The taste was indescribable, rich and complex and satisfying in a way that made her moan. She drank the entire glass in seconds, and Vladislav immediately provided another. Easy, he cautioned. Too much too fast and you'll make yourself sick. She forced herself to slow down, savoring the second glass. The thirst faded to a manageable level, and she became aware of other sensations. She felt strong, powerful, like she could tear the world apart with her bare hands. She felt alive in a way she never had as a human, every sense singing with newfound intensity. I can hear your heartbeat, she said wonderingly. Wait, do you have a heartbeat? Slow, but yes. Vampire hearts beat about 10 times per minute, just enough to circulate blood through our systems. He smiled. What else do you notice? She stood, and the movement was effortless, graceful in a way she'd never managed as a clumsy human. She crossed to the mirror on the wall and gasped at her reflection. Her skin had paled to vampire white, luminous and flawless. Her hair seemed richer, more lustrous. But the most dramatic change was her eyes. They were crimson now, the same shade as Vladislav's, glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked like herself, but also like someone completely different, someone powerful, someone eternal. I'm beautiful, she breathed. You were always beautiful, Vladislav said, coming to stand behind her. But yes, the transformation enhances physical appearance. You're stunning. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and they stood together looking at their reflection. How do you feel? Any regrets? She leaned back against him, marveling at how right it felt. No regrets. I feel like I've come home to myself. Like, this is what I was always meant to be. She turned in his arms to face him. Thank you. For giving me this. For standing by me through the pain. Always, he promised. You're mine now, in every way that matters. My partner, my equal, my forever. She kissed him, and it was different now, better. She could match his strength, his intensity, his passion. They were the same now, two immortals with eternity stretching ahead of them. The following weeks were a period of adjustment and joy. Katerina learned to control her new strength and speed, to manage her thirst, to navigate vampire society as one of them rather than a human outsider. The change in how other vampires treated her was dramatic and immediate. Even those who had looked down on her before now offered respect, if not always warmth. She was Vladislav's vampire partner now, not his human toy, and that made all the difference in their eyes. Seraphine became her teacher in earnest, drilling her on vampire law and history and politics. Lucian taught her to fight, insisting that she needed to be able to defend herself despite Vladislav's constant presence. She proved to be a quick study. Her new vampire reflexes and strength-making combat feel almost natural. But the best part was simply being with Vladislav without the shadow of her mortality hanging over them. They had time now, endless time to explore their relationship, to learn everything about each other, to build a life together. They spent nights talking until dawn, racing through the forest at impossible speeds, making love with an intensity her human body could never have withstood. 6 months after her transformation, Vladislav threw a formal ball to celebrate, inviting vampire leaders from all the territories to introduce Katerina as his official consort. Even Dragan came, though his expression was sour throughout the evening. I see you went ahead with it, the old vampire said when he finally approached them. Turned her. I did, Vladislav said, his arm firmly around Katerina's waist. Any objections? Dragan studied Katerina with those ancient eyes, and she met his gaze without flinching. Finally, he shook his head. She's stronger than I expected. Perhaps this won't be the disaster I predicted. He looked at Vladislav. The hunter activity has decreased in recent months. Whatever strategy you've been implementing, it's working. We've been working together, Vladislav said. All the territories, sharing intelligence and resources. Turns out cooperation is more effective than isolation. A lesson I'm still learning, Dragan admitted grudgingly. He turned to Katerina. Welcome to immortality, young one. Try not to waste it. As he walked away, Katerina laughed. I think that's the closest he gets to approval. From Dragan? That was practically a blessing. Vladislav spun her onto the dance floor, moving with perfect grace. You've impressed him. You've impressed everyone. I had a good teacher, she said, smiling up at him. The best king I know. And I have the best queen, he replied, and the words made her heart soar. They danced until nearly dawn, surrounded by vampires who were slowly becoming allies and friends. When the party finally ended and they retreated to their chambers, Katerina felt overwhelmingly happy. Thank you, she said as they stood on their private balcony, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten. They'd have to retreat inside soon, but for now, they could enjoy these last moments of night. For what? For fighting for us, for not giving up when it would have been easier, for showing me that love is worth any transformation, any danger, any challenge. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I know the future won't always be easy. There will be more enemies, more challenges, more times when people question whether we should be together. But I'm not afraid anymore, because I know we can face anything as long as we're together. Together, he echoed, pulling her close. For the next century and all the centuries after that, I love you, Katerina Dragomir. The use of his name as hers made her breath catch. I love you too, my king, my vampire, my forever. They kissed as the sun began to rise, and then they retreated inside together into the safety of their castle, into their shared life. The challenges Katerina had predicted would come, of course. There would be more hunter attacks, more political intrigue, more dangers to face and overcome. But they would face them together, two vampires bound by love and commitment and the promise of eternity. In the end, the story of the vampire king who locked down his castle to find his missing human had transformed into something far more beautiful. A love story that transcended species, mortality, and time itself. A story of a king who found his queen, and a woman who found her home in the most unexpected place. And they lived, truly lived, forever after.